Today we're hearing from Dr. Michelle Smith, who is a recent hire here in the English department. You've probably seen her as she's been coming to cool stuff. Her primary research is in feminist rhetoric, with particular interest in the intersection of theories of material rhetoric and feminist historiography. The title of her presentation today, as you can see, is In Rosie's Shadow, Archival Condensation. Yeah, it's Condensation in World War II British Rhetoric. Thanks so much.
Thank you all for having me, and thank Victor for inviting me to speak to you all, and just all of you for welcoming me here in my first semester at Clemson. So I thought I'd begin today by saying a bit about how I identify myself as a scholar with characters businessly, before diving into a specific example of the work that I do. So I call myself a feminist rhetorician. What does this mean? When I teach feminist rhetorics, I tell my students it's not a feminist theory course, it's not a study of how feminism has developed over time, and it's most certainly not a class in how to be a good feminist. It's about taking a feminist approach to rhetorical scholarship. In the class, we examine what I see as three basic strands, or waves, if we must, of feminist rhetorical scholarship. First, feminist rhetoricians recover and recuperate women's speaking and writing. This involves both adding women to the canon and reconsidering the criteria for what counts as rhetoric in the first place. Scholars in this camp analyze women's speeches and writing, compile anthologies or new editions of women's rhetorics, and re-theorize rhetoric as a more inclusive discipline. Second, feminist rhetoricians analyze representations of women's rhetoric in order to understand what conditions have led to women's silencing or empowerment. Scholarship in this strand includes reception studies, as well as studies of religious or legal injunctions, conduct, literature, and rhetorical pedagogy. Both of these endeavors are central in feminist rhetorical scholarship from the beginning, especially because in many cases it is hard to find historical women's words apart from the representations of men. Thus, some scholars who would prefer the first approach are forced into the second. And of course, many studies do both, analyzing women's rhetoric alongside the reception of that rhetoric. These first two strands are still active today, but more recently, feminist rhetoricians have turned their attention to the rhetorical gendering of spaces, objects, professions, and so on. Projects in this third strand ask, how does gender itself function rhetorically, apart from any necessary or natural link to male and female bodies? Some examples include studies of the gendering of school spaces, of the pulpit, of the bicycle, and of particular professions like medicine or anthropology. This third strand is where I locate my own work. Specifically, my research investigates the rhetorical material gendering of work, and that's what my talk today will focus on. Of course, we know that the gendering of work happens not only through text, but also through physical spaces, arrangements, practices, tools, and tasks. If we hope to better understand the persistence of gender divisions of labor, we need methodologies that can help us investigate the historical intersections of bodies, objects, space, and time. Feminist scholars have begun examining these material components of gendered experience. And whether we consider visuals themselves as material or not, we often use images to access historical spaces, objects, and embodied practices. For instance, in my own work, I've used maps, photographs, and art to try to access some of the material aspects of work in the intentional communities I studied. And some of that work is what I presented on for my job talk last winter, which I know many of you were present at. However, as we incorporate material methods into our research, we need a material methodology to unpack the significance of these artifacts. My work on World War II recruitment rhetoric began with a familiar visual. The omnipresent Rosie the Riveter poster endures as a feminist icon, a synecdochal representation of women who went to work for the nation in World War II. However, as James Kimball and Lester Olson have illustrated, revisiting the circulation and material context of this image significantly changes the meaning we ascribe to it. Despite the pervasive notion that this was a government recruitment poster, Rosie actually circulated for only 2 weeks in one factory. It was only seen by men and women already employed by the Westinghouse Electric and Manufacturing Company, alongside other work incentive posters. The phrase Rosie the Riveter was popularized by Norman Rockwell painting and a wartime song, and was not associated with this image until it was resurrected from an archive in the 1980s. Finally, in its own time, Rosie's famous bared bicep was more a working class than a feminist symbol. As a cautionary tale, then, Rosie warns that visual artifacts are no more self-evident than written or spoken text. I suggest that feminist rhetoricians working with visuals and other material artifacts might borrow some methodological tools from scholarship on material rhetoric. Put simply, we must investigate the materiality of these artifacts, just as scholars of material rhetoric call us to interrogate texts. For instance, Vicky Toller-Burton's concept of rhetorical accretion helps reveal how women's texts become surrounded and circumscribed by male-authored frames that reposition or speak over women's voices. Similarly, visuals and other material artifacts do not speak in and for themselves, but as part of a network, including creators, distributors, audiences, and other related texts, artifacts, and objects. In fact, with visuals like the Rosie image, we often see a reverse of what Burton describes. Whereas Hester and Rogers' autobiography had additional textual artifacts accreted to it through its various editions, the text and context that originally gave the Rosie poster its meaning fell away or eroded over time. Kimball and Olson's task then was to unearth those texts and contexts and reattach them to the image. This process of reverse accretion is useful when objects or images come unmoored from their context, as is increasingly common in the digital age. If we shift metaphors, we might describe this archival work in terms of evaporation and condensation, where the scholar's challenge is to rematerialize a context that is evaporated, leaving a disembodied artifact or image. This idea of archival condensation drives my work with several other World War II posters. So, awestruck and perhaps perversely inspired by the extent of the Rosie mythology, I wanted to unearth some of the posters that actually filled the role mistakenly ascribed to this one. That is, if the Westinghouse Rosie was not how the government tried to recruit women into the workforce, then what did those recruitment efforts look like? My project revisits the rhetoric of wartime recruitment by recovering a set of 9 government recruitment posters circulated by the Office of War Information from 1942 to 44. In addition, I introduced recruitment rhetoric as a concept useful for studies of gendered labor across space and time. In April 1942, 5 months after Pearl Harbor, the government created an agency to handle labor supply issues for the duration of the conflict. The War Manpower Commission, having no power to enforce its directives or regulations, turned to a policy of promotion, a shift that brought it into the domain of the Office of War Information, or OWI. The WMC and OWI coordinated their efforts to recruit women workers, a collaboration culminating in the recruitment posters examined here. While the OWI was not solely responsible for the wartime surge in women's employment, its campaigns were likely a factor in what became the largest increase of women workers in U.S. history. In the week prior to Pearl Harbor, 12.1 million U.S. women were in the workforce. Just under 2.5 years later, in March 1944, that number had increased by 36% to 16.5 million. Altogether, over 8.1 million women either joined the workforce or changed jobs during this period. And one of the themes of this research for me is that I think the number of women who changed jobs and moved into war industry jobs in this period is one of those sort of untold stories, since we're obsessed with women right now. The OWI's campaigns targeted married women as the largest untapped source of labor. Though single women were still twice as likely to hold a job in March 1944, the sheer number of married women exceeded single women in the workforce for the first time in the nation's history. One of the particular challenges of this archival condensation was reconnecting the posters with the written text surrounding their production. Over time, the OWI records had been divided and stored in 2 different archives, the images in one and the written documents in another. But eventually I was able to learn more about the genesis of these posters. The biggest breakthrough came when I learned that the 9 posters examined here were part of 4 distinct recruitment campaigns, each with its own rationale, goals, and strategies. I draw on this context, as well as statistics about women's work during the war, as part of my archival condensation and examination of the recruitment rhetoric of these posters. I suggest that recruitment rhetoric is central to rhetorics of gendered labor because attempts to attract women and men to particular careers are a constant and crucial mechanism for articulating norms of gendered work. Recruitment rhetorics function constitutively. enticing certain kinds of individuals' particular careers by presenting them as naturally suited for that work. Like other constitutive rhetorics, recruitment rhetoric represents a situation that's pre-existing in order to call it into being. Thus, recruitment rhetorics are hortatory rather than descriptive. In this case, recruitment posters illustrate one ideal of women's wartime work, but that ideal may or may not fully represent women's work or reasons for working during World War II. The recruitment rhetoric in general ranges from educational programs and advising to job ads and benefits structures. World War II recruitment rhetoric operated largely through visuals. These images contributed to what Barbara Biesecker calls a visual ecology of repetition, where citizens are confronted with a stream of similar images that shape their understanding of a topic or event. My project explores the visual ecology of women's work in World War II, as illustrated by the repetition of visual tropes and rhetorical themes in the OWI's recruitment campaign. To this end, I identified 3 strands of recruitment rhetoric in the OWI posters: appeals to patriotism, to continuity, and to domesticity. Overall, I argue that wartime recruitment efforts, with their emphasis on women's capacities, do at times approximate the feminist ethos ascribed to the false rosy. However, this feminist potential was consistently accompanied and overshadowed by more conventional appeals, articulating the change in women's roles as temporary and reasserting women's rightful, natural place in the home. Patriotism spoke to both aims of the Women Power campaign, encouraging cultural acceptance of women's wartime work and recruiting women to specific war jobs. Applicable to a variety of industries and occupations, patriotic recruitment rhetoric used a colloquial tone to create a sense of national urgency and emphasize women workers' character over competence. A poster from the first campaign in December 1942 shows how patriotism could be deployed to reduce social and cultural obstacles for women's work. The poster's slogan speaks on behalf of the royal we standing in for the nation. Speaking about women rather than to them, the poster shows the constitutive nature of recruitment rhetoric, depicting a woman working with specialized technical equipment, presumably in a munitions factory. The poster's direct colloquial address is a key component of its patriotic appeal. This strategic use of informal language was endorsed by OWI officials who instructed, "We want to see posters on fences, on the walls of buildings, on village greens, on boards in the front of the city hall and the post office, in hotel lobbies, in the windows of vacant stores, shouting at people from unexpected places with all the urgency which the sport demands." The red, white, and blue of the poster, the women in the war is blue, it's hard to see here, along with the all-caps red bordered text at the bottom, communicates the urgent need for women workers and directly links them to the nation's well-being. Yet, by highlighting the nation's dire situation, propaganda depicted women's war work as a temporary emergency measure, undermining the campaign's potential to shift understanding of women's work writ large. While the poster suggests that we can't win without women's work, it implies that once victory is achieved, women's work will be done. Over the course of the war, patriotic appeals evolved to expand the notion of war jobs beyond factory work to include agricultural and domestic work, as in this poster. Indeed, the very idea of a crop corps shows this campaign's attempt to expand Americans' understanding of the home front. By 1943, there was a shortage in service jobs, and the OWI's September campaign, its largest yet, worked to recruit women to these less glamorous war jobs. Indeed, the need for women in these positions increased as women left service jobs for better paid war work. Thus, the ad fulfills the third of the OWI's 6 war information themes, depicting the need to work, the countless ways Americans must work to win the war in factories, mines, fields, etc. Other posters in this campaign combine this message with the 5th theme, the need to sacrifice, to give up luxuries, to devote spare time to the war effort, and so on. For instance, OWI poster 77 urges women, "Can all you can, it's a real war job." Moreover, like other patriotic recruitment appeals, this image directs our attention to the motivation and character of the workers, rather than the work itself. The farming implements depicted here are less vital than the patriotic glow of the couple as they gaze into the middle distance. Similarly, another 1942 poster attempts to recruit women as nurses not by emphasizing their competence but their character. Kneeling in front of the faceless Uncle Sam figure, this woman is not demonstrating her skills or expertise, but rather her deep commitment and patriotic motivation. Her pose suggests not an experienced war-worn nurse, but a passionate and idealistic new inductee. In contrast to the public memory of the Westinghouse Rosie, which superimposes an anachronistic feminism over women's wartime work, these OWI posters show that patriotism was a more prominent appeal during the war. Still, while patriotism may have influenced women's decision to work in World War II, it was likely tempered by pragmatism. For the women who went to work during the war, patriotism may have been a device for framing and explaining their work to themselves and others, but was rarely the sole motivation for women's work. While patriotic appeals were common throughout wartime propaganda, posters employing a rhetoric of continuity addressed fears that wartime work would destroy women's femininity and suitability for marriage and motherhood, as well as the American family and home. The potentially liberating and life-changing aspects of war work were circumscribed by an appeal to continuity characterized by visual appeals to conventional femininity and an emphasis on similarities between women's wartime and traditional domestic work. Poster number 52 from the OWI series articulates the importance of women's work, associating women with success through the alliteration in all caps formatting of the words women and win. Photographed by Alfred Palmer at the Douglas Aircraft Company in Long Beach, California, the woman is an employer of Douglas Aircraft, shown working on the nose section, or an employee, sorry, of Douglas Aircraft, shown working on the nose section of the B-17F bomber. Of the hundreds of photos Palmer offered the OWI, this was one of the few selected for use in propaganda, suggesting that the woman's race, age, appearance, pose, and task all supported the office's goals. The vivid depiction of a woman in so masculine a war machine as a Navy bomber is a striking emblem of positive wartime use of women's work. That is, to the extent that female defense workers were young, white, beautiful, and well-groomed, their unconventional work was portrayed as both important and glamorous. In contrast to the 1942 poster, this March 1943 poster more fully participates in the visual ecology of repetition of the emblematic war worker. In addition to the ubiquitous headscarf, the photograph shows a woman at work, emphasizing her capability and beauty simultaneously. Her eyes are focused on the task at hand, and she does not smile for the camera, yet the image highlights her attractive features and prominently displayed wedding ring. Her red lipstick and nail polish further suggest that despite her factory job, she is still elite. While the worker's conventional femininity might have reassured the public, the image also glamorizes war work for women. Indeed, government officials felt that middle-class women needed to be persuaded that it was worth their while to take a step down and enter the blue-collar world. The success of such appeals may have been partly responsible for the fact that war industries drew roughly equal numbers of women from other industry groups as they did from men. A second poster from the March 1943 campaign further perpetuates the image of women's war work as significant but compatible with traditional gender norms. The phrase "saved his life" suggests the momentous contributions of World War II nurses, while the second half of the slogan hints at a possible vocational appeal. Nursing here may become a woman's life, not just her work. This phrase somewhat unconventionally opens the door for a woman's work to continue after the war is over. However, this appeal may have seemed less surprising in its own time. 68% of single women who joined the workforce during World War II had been in school before Pearl Harbor and were presumably planning to work all along. Moreover, nursing had long been a socially accepted career choice for women. Finally, the woman's physical appearance also invites a conventional interpretation. Like the factory worker in the previous poster, this nurse is young, white, attractive, meticulously made up, and unmarred by the physical demands or debris of her job. Other posters repeated this pattern of hinting at vocation, but then reasserting gender continuity, as in OWI poster 55, which suggested that women might find a war job that fitted them personally. Though this woman is in a factory jumpsuit engaged in technical work, the contraption in front of her resembles nothing so much as a sewing machine. Implying a close fit between women's domestic and war work confirmed the commonplace that women's rightful place is in the home. An easy transition into the war workforce might pave the way for an easy transition back once the war was over. The submerged vocational appeals in these posters come closest to the wistful interpretations of the "We Can Do It" slogan as an endorsement of feminine strength. Vocational appeals may have been attractive to women, but they were circumscribed by the temporary vision of women's work predominantly championed by the U.S. government during World War II. While appeals to patriotism and continuity were present in varying degrees throughout the war, the use of explicit domestic appeals increased toward the end of the conflict. The OWI's final campaign in March 1944 based its recruitment strategies on the findings of an October 1943 survey. The survey found that the majority of American women were aware of the labor shortage, believed that more women were needed in war jobs, and recognized the importance of civilian service. Yet 73% of non-employed women surveyed were unwilling to take a full-time war job. Thus, the final recruitment campaign reflected the OWI's growing suspicion that the basic restraining factor on recruitment now is not that the woman does not know what to do, but that she is not interested in doing anything. I thought it was very important to tell you that the caps and the italics were not mine. In these posters, the recruitment rhetoric fixated on domesticity foregrounded women's relationship with men, an appeal based in an implicit understanding of women as helpmates and an insistent heteronormativity. One poster's domestic appeal emphasizes a personal relationship between women and the male soldiers they were purportedly replacing. "Do the Job He Left Behind" shows a woman in headscarf, coveralls, and gloves, riveting a large metal object that dwarfs her in size. In contrast to appeals to patriotism, this poster asks women to work not for the nation, but for him, a specific soldier that can no longer fulfill his post. The stars and stripes in the background are overshadowed by the all-caps, large font "he" dominating the message. The connection of this woman to the man she's replacing is a romantic move, with its allusion to the girl he left behind, that positions her as a dependent filling in for a male partner. Though women were largely needed in factory jobs because of the increased demand for munitions, not because men had left those jobs to go to war, wartime propaganda reinforced the temporary role that government and industry leaders imagined for women workers, who were expected to vacate their jobs for returning soldiers. Other posters addressed the question of women's work in relation to a specific man, usually her husband. For instance, the woman in this poster is not depicted at work, despite her coveralls, headscarf, and the factory button on her breast. Her husband's gaze is directed at her raised fist, presumably as an endorsement of her strength, though from some angles his expression appears more perplexed than proud. Interestingly, this poster does not assume a husband in the military. He appears to be a businessman. This choice may reflect the fact that women with husbands present were far less likely to work. In 1944, women with husbands absent, either away at the war or elsewhere, made up 12% of all married women, but 26% of employed married women. Conversely, of the women who were not working before or after the war, 65% were married with husbands present. This data supports the poster's implication that women need their husband's cooperation to work, especially if those husbands are still at home. And yet, a husband could be a barrier to a woman's work even if he was absent, as this poster shows. Indeed, we might not recognize this woman as having anything to do with war work were it not for the text in the bottom. She has uncovered hair falling over her shoulders and stares into the distance, clutching a handful of letters with long red fingernails. The poster implies that lonely war brides are moping around the house, unhealthily preoccupied with romantic relationships, and attempts to shame them into the workforce. As a draft of suggested OWI copy explained, eventually the neighbors are going to think it very strange if you're not working. They'll be working too. In fact, any strong, able-bodied woman who is not completely occupied with a job and a home is going to be considered a slacker just as much as the man who avoids the draft, which of course is the derivation of the term slacker. That didn't work. The idea that women should not only be proud to work but ashamed of not working is one of the more aggressive moves of the campaign. Of the three recruitment appeals, this increasingly shrill appeal to domesticity bears the sharpest contrast to the Westinghouse Rosie. It is hard to imagine contemporary viewers embracing these images as a celebration of women's wartime work. However, they were a central part of the government's recruitment strategies, and they rhetorically framed women's work during and after the war. In the end, the posters examined here are not diametrically opposed to the rosy image we know today. In fact, it was likely the false Rosie's reflection of the ideal World War II factory worker as established in World War II propaganda that invited the misreading in the first place. The work of archival condensation reminds us that the OWI posters must be remembered as recruitment posters, just as the Westinghouse Rosie comes into fuller focus in the context of other work incentive posters. In other words, neither work incentive nor recruitment posters can fulfill our cultural craving for a representative emblem of women's World War II work. Work incentive posters were created by war production committees to raise morale and lessen labor management disputes and strikes. Recruitment posters showed an idealized image of a war worker in an attempt to recruit unemployed women, especially white middle-class housewives, and thus automatically excluded from their representations the non-white and working-class women who were always already working. If we want a visual representation of women's work in World War II, these highly mediated rhetorical artifacts are not the place to look. They reveal more about how government and industry leaders perceived women's work than about what women's work looked like or how women experienced and understood their work. In fact, we may do better to consider the raw materials that these posters grew out of. The OWI photographers sent around the country to capture images of women in the war industry represent a broader spectrum of women workers, including working-class women and women of color who seized the opportunity to move into desirable, highly paid manufacturing positions. These women are visible in OWI photographs that were not popularized as posters, presumably because they do not represent that emblematic female war worker. While we cannot expect recruitment rhetorics to accurately portray women's work, they do matter. Recruitment text and images help determine how comfortable women and men feel in particular jobs. Importantly, they also shape the attitudes and preconceptions of those on the inside, individuals and groups in charge of hiring and promotions. They participate in shaping the gendered, raced, classed, embodied culture of particular companies and industries. Today's recruitment rhetorics can be found in not only professional and educational texts and practices, but also in popular culture. Depictions of women's work in television, movies, and the media play a significant role in shaping cultural views of gender and work, and thus function as a form of recruitment rhetoric. For instance, Shonda Rhimes' Grey's Anatomy scandal and How to Get Away with Murder represent a diverse group of women in the historically male-dominated fields of surgical medicine, Washington politics, and criminal law, respectively. The constitutive rhetoric of Shondaland suggests that fully half of America's surgeons, DC insiders, and lawyers are women with an impressive proportion of men and women of color to boot. Rhimes' creations invite young women to imagine themselves in these roles. And yet, as a form of recruitment rhetoric, such representations may or may not prepare women for the obstacles they will face should they pursue these careers. As our preoccupation with the Westinghouse Rosie suggests, there's a fine line between rhetorics that inspire women to break barriers and forge new paths, and rhetorics that assert a progress narrative of women's work, suggesting that the barriers are non-existent, the paths swept clean. Thank you.
Okay, we have about half an hour for questions.
These the three categories that you pointed out, patriotism, continuity, and domestic, but how do you find them, because they seem to be kind of gray, because like the patriotism one isn't necessarily involved in the picture that dealt with, for instance, continuity, because you see that she's actually doing work as opposed to just smiling up at Dr. Sam. How do you reconcile the sort of internal sort of what seems like sort of contradictions, like when you say this is, it's not be like sort of picky choosing of both pictures.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that definitely, I think all the strands here, all three strands are, lots of them are at work in more than one poster, right? So I think that's entirely fair. I think part of my idea was just to think about recruitment rhetoric as making an argument about what motivated women's work or what should motivate women's work. And there are, multiple answers sometimes within one poster to that question. But yeah, for the sake of sort of organizing, I agree that maybe,
Categories are always great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was
exactly.
a great presentation. Did you find any of those categories, for instance, like patriotism or anything? Because I know when you were flipping through those posters, you must have saw a lot of posters that were directed at males as well. So I was wondering if you happen to see any of those overarching genres and categories for those posters as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Overview Wise campaigns were, they tended to be more in charge of sort of the home front war information. And so while that included men, there was sort of a separate office in charge of like recruiting men to the military, for instance, some of the posters, I mean, I find the category that the Rosie poster actually belongs to, the work incentive posters, to be really fascinating in terms of thinking about what's going on with class in World War II, and sort of the idea that like now of all times we can't afford a strike, right? So buck up, right? And those were maybe the posters that I saw that addressed men and women, together a lot more rather than sort of one or the other.
I was flipping through images as like the poster images as you were looking at, and this differences between the two do seem rather stark.
Yeah.
Men seem to be glorified for almost as heroes. Mm-hmm. So I think we're on to something. So.
Yeah, and I think again this idea of men's sort of heroic work links up with this idea of like, this is an urgent national crisis. We need heroes to step up, and then things can go back to normal, right? That idea, and that has implications for women that are different than the implications that it has for men. Yeah. Thank you.
So I definitely did not know that the whole Rosie poster wasn't really, it sounds like it wasn't really circulated into the 80s.
And wasn't called Rosie until the 80s.
Yeah.
It's the important
So I'm wondering
thing. Well, not the important thing, but another important thing.
Right. I'm wondering where that kind of lines up with kind of like the end of second wave feminism. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering if there's any connections there, and also thinking about Lori Grease's book. I'm sure you probably were looking at that, and just how that image circulated from the 80s until now.
Mm-hmm.
That would be like a whole side project.
I think that's right, though. I mean, it's fascinating. As I said, I was sort of, perversely inspired by the extent of our misunderstanding of that poster, I was like, who taught me that was a poster that recruited women to work? I don't know. How did I know that? I don't know, right? And so I do think that the Rosie poster, because, somebody found it in an archive in the 80s, and it spoke to that moment. And so, they're like, yes, this is what we want to think about women's work in World War II. But at the time, these were maybe more what was circulating, in the work incentive posters, as I said, most of them are posters with men, it's just, this one happened to have a woman in it, like, oh, we have female employees too, we also need them to work harder, let's make one with a woman on it, and that's the one that we grabbed in the 80s. So I think I think you're right that it's definitely more telling about what was happening in 1980s feminism, than what we traditionally make it represent.
There's a kind of, I was thinking about comparing your work with U.S. recruitment posters to Germany at the same time. And German, not that they were recruiting in the same way, but they focused on area needs. The women, posters about that involved the women in them were to have more babies, to perpetuate the Aryan race. And the ones that depicted men were depicted with a shadow Viking warrior in the back to perpetuate the idea of being connected to this Nordic Aryan racial purity. So and the books that I have about women during this time all focus on being in the home, raising a family. That's your work. That's your job. It's very, very different.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I pulled this back up because, obviously most of the posters I'm looking at here are the need to work. That you can imagine what the nature of the enemy looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Not super amazing. The nature of our allies focuses, on more positive depictions of other countries. But 6, the Americans, right, is that kind of that more sort of national theme here. But the posters that tried to do that showed like African American servicemen and things like, they were like inclusion and equality, right? That was the kind of thing that they went for. And I don't have one of those posters handy here, but it's sort of it's definitely nationalistic, but in a very different way from what you're describing. Yes.
I think it's interesting. You look at recruitment posters from the same era, specifically Navy recruitment posters. America is depicted as Columbia, the feminized version of it. And I think it speaks to the rhetorical gender you were speaking about. And it's interesting the dichotomy that's there between women in the workforce, but America has this hell of a Troy kind of ethos about it that the men have to go out and defend for others. So do you think maybe that might be an avenue that you really explore the research?
Yeah, I definitely think so. One of in a sort of dreamed up larger version of this project, in addition to thinking about what Rosie says about us in the 80s, I want to look at how women functioned in women functions in propaganda, in U.S.-based propaganda during the war. And so part of that is definitely like, what are we fighting for, which was also an idea used in German propaganda to try to undermine American troops, was saying, like, you're fighting for that girl, she's probably back home not being loyal to you in less nice ways, in less friendly manners, right? So that, women are sort of deployed in interesting ways in that propaganda. And then to look at, for example, when they're recruiting women to waves, right? Like, then what are we fighting for? If you're a woman, what are you fighting for? Is it a family? Is it your children? Is it your future children? Is it, how do we imagine that differently? How we imagine, men is defending her, right, in that broad sense. Yeah, maybe the closest though so far is that, that do the job he left behind kind of thing, right? That employs a he in a way that may be similar to the kind of, essence of woman that, men are supposed to be fighting for.
Yeah, something I've always wondered during that period was, there's a shift from women from the domestic sphere into the working sphere, and clearly the domestic sphere, the nuclear family or whatever, has been set up so that functions as it is. I've always wondered what happened when these women went to work to the family, to the domestic duties. Who came in and took the place of that? Was it people lower on the socioeconomic level? And then what happened when the war effort was over and they realized, oh, maybe I don't need to be in this role anymore?
And I think I have a couple not comprehensive thoughts in response to that, but my couple of thoughts are, first, the sort of aside that I made to you about, to all of you, about the importance of looking at how women's work, women who were already working, shifted their work during this war, because a lot of them, left household service, left other, other kinds of positions and moved into war work. And I think that's, just as important as the sort of women, our progress myth of the women, leaving the house and going to work in World War II. And